I stared at my phone screen, my hands trembling, as I read the text message that just arrived from my father after 5 years of complete silence. You could sell it to help your brother. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This message came just moments after my Aunt Patricia had posted a photo of my 70-foot yacht online. My parents had completely cut me off, treated me like I was already dead, abandoned me, when I refused to give my inheritance to my gambling-addicted brother Danny. For 5 years, not a single word, birthday wish, or acknowledgement that I even existed. Now they wanted my yacht. 5 years ago, I thought I understood what family meant. My name is Freeman. And back then, I believed blood was thicker than water, that parents would always love their children equally, and that doing the right thing would be respected. I was 27 years old and completely naive about how cruel people could become when money entered the picture. Everything changed the day my grandfather passed away. He had been my rock, the one person in our family who saw potential in me when everyone else dismissed my dreams. While my brother Danny charmed his way through life, always finding someone else to clean up his messes, Grandpa recognized something different in me. He saw determination, integrity, and a willingness to work hard for what I wanted. When the will was read, I inherited his entire trust fund, $250,000 that he had specifically designated for me, with a handwritten note explaining that he believed I would use it wisely to build a better life. Danny inherited some family heirlooms and a smaller cash amount, which seemed fair since he had already borrowed thousands from Grandpa over the years for his gambling debts. Danny exploded when he heard the terms. He stormed out of the lawyer's office screaming that it was unfair that I didn't deserve that much money, and that Grandpa had always played favorites. My parents, Robert and Linda, immediately rushed after him, leaving me sitting alone with the lawyer staring at papers that suddenly felt more like a curse than a blessing. The family meeting happened 3 days later in our living room. Danny had spent those 3 days working on our parents, spinning his sob story about how unfair life had been to him, how his gambling was just bad luck, and how a good brother would share the inheritance. When I walked into that room, I could see the decision had already been made in their minds. My mother, Linda, sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes red from crying. She had always been emotional, but Danny knew exactly how to manipulate her tears. My father, Robert, stood by the window, his arms crossed, wearing the same stern expression he used during his toughest business negotiations. Danny lounged in Grandpa's old chair like he owned the place, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Freeman, we need to talk about this inheritance situation." My father began, his voice cold and businesslike. "Your brother is in a very difficult position right now, and family means helping each other through tough times." I looked around the room feeling like I had walked into an ambush. Grandpa left specific instructions. He wanted me to have this money for my future. Your grandfather was an old man who didn't understand the full situation. Linda interjected, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Danny needs help right now, and you have the means to provide it. Surely you can see that family comes first." Danny leaned forward, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Freeman, I'm not asking for all of it, just enough to get these creditors off my back. Once I get back on my feet, I'll pay you back with interest. You know I'm good for it." I knew Danny was anything but good for it. Since turning 18, he had borrowed money from every family member, friend, and acquaintance he could find. His gambling addiction had progressed from casual poker games to serious casino debts. And now he owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. "Danny, you've said that before," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Remember when you borrowed $5,000 from Mom and Dad for your business opportunity? Or the $3,000 you took from Aunt Patricia for your car repairs? None of that money ever came back." His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger underneath. "That's different. Those were investments that didn't pan out. This is about survival, Freeman. These people will hurt me if I don't pay. My father stepped closer, his voice taking on a threatening tone I had never heard him use with me before. Freeman, your brother is in real danger. If you refuse to help him, when you have the means, what kind of person does that make you? The kind of person who honors Grandpa's wishes, I said, standing my ground despite my racing heart. He left me this money for a reason, and it wasn't to enable Danny's gambling addiction. The room erupted. Linda began sobbing, accusing me of being heartless and selfish. Robert's face turned red with anger as he shouted about family loyalty and responsibility. Danny just sat back and watched, enjoying the chaos he had orchestrated. You're destroying this family, Linda wailed. Your own brother could be hurt or killed, and you care more about money than his life. I care about helping him get real treatment for his addiction, I shot back. Giving him more money will only make the problem worse. That was when my father delivered his ultimatum. His voice became deadly quiet, and his eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. Freeman, you have a choice to make right here, right now. You can be the bigger man, help your brother, and keep this family together. Or you can be selfish, keep that money for yourself, and lose all of us forever. I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign that someone understood my position, that someone remembered the values Grandpa had tried to teach us. I found nothing but anger, manipulation, and betrayal. If helping Danny means enabling his addiction and disrespecting Grandpa's final wishes, then I guess I know where I stand, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Robert spoke his words, cutting through me like ice. Then you're no son of mine. Linda nodded through her tears. If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back. We won't have a selfish, ungrateful child destroying our family. Danny finally spoke up, his voice filled with fake sadness. Freeman, you're making a huge mistake. Family is all we have in this world. I gathered what little dignity I had left and walked toward the door. Grandpa was my family. He's the only one who ever believed in me, without asking for anything in return. The final dinner happened 2 weeks later. Linda had called, her voice strained but hopeful, asking me to come for Sunday dinner. For a moment, I thought they had come to their senses, that we could work through this as a real family should. I arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, wearing the shirt Grandpa had given me for my birthday, hoping it might remind them of the man whose memory they were disrespecting. But when I walked into the dining room, I realized this wasn't a reconciliation dinner. This was a funeral for my place in the family. They had literally turned their backs on me. The table was set for 3 people, not 4. When I entered the room, my parents and Danny were already seated, and they didn't turn around to acknowledge my presence. They continued their conversation as if I wasn't there, discussing Danny's plans for getting his life together and how proud they were of his commitment to change. I stood there for 10 minutes waiting for someone to acknowledge me, to invite me to sit, to act like I was their family member. Nothing. I finally cleared my throat and said, "Should I get a chair from the kitchen?" My father didn't turn around. "I think you know where you stand in this house, Freeman." That was the moment I knew my family was truly dead to me. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and the determination to prove that Grandpa had been right to believe in me. As I drove away that night, I had no idea that my parents had already begun telling people I had moved abroad and didn't want contact with the family. They had decided to rewrite history, making me the villain who abandoned them, rather than admitting they had chosen to enable Danny's destructive behavior over supporting their other son. The first night in Seattle, I slept in my car outside a Starbucks on Capitol Hill. I had driven straight through from our hometown in Ohio, stopping only for gas and coffee, running on pure adrenaline and heartbreak. The inheritance money sat in my bank account untouched, but I was determined to make it on my own terms, to build something meaningful, rather than just coast on Grandpa's generosity. Seattle felt like the right choice for a fresh start. The tech industry was booming, and I had a computer science degree that I had never really used, because I had been working in my father's construction business since graduation. Robert had convinced me that family business was more important than following my own dreams. Another manipulation I was only now beginning to recognize. I rented a studio apartment from Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly landlord who took pity on me when she saw me searching classified ads at that same Starbucks for the third day in a row. She charged me half the deposit because, as she put it, "You look like a young man who's been through something terrible, but you've got honest eyes." The apartment was tiny, barely 400 square feet, but it was mine. No family drama, no guilt trips, no pressure to enable someone else's destructive choices. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. I spent my first week in Seattle walking around the city, getting familiar with the neighborhoods, and trying to figure out how to break into the tech industry with no local connections or relevant work experience. My computer skills were solid, but I had been away from programming for several years while working construction. The breakthrough came at a networking event downtown called Seattle Tech Mixers. I had found it advertised on a bulletin board at a coffee shop, and despite my terror at walking into a room full of strangers, I forced myself to go. I wore my only decent button-down shirt and practiced introducing myself in the mirror for an hour beforehand. That's where I met Jake Morrison, a fellow outsider who had moved to Seattle from Portland with big dreams and limited connections. Jake had a background in business development but lacked technical skills, while I had programming abilities but no idea how to turn them into a viable business. "Yeah, you know what this city needs," Jake said after we had been talking for 20 minutes about our respective backgrounds. "More small businesses that actually understand technology instead of just throwing money at problems and hoping for the best." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I've been talking to local business owners, restaurants, small retailers, service companies." Jake explained, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "They're all struggling with basic technology problems. Their websites are garbage. Their inventory systems are from the Stone Age, and they're losing money because they can't figure out how to modernize." That conversation lasted until the event ended, and then continued at a nearby diner until 2 in the morning. By the end of the night, we had sketched out a basic business plan for a technology consulting company focused on helping small businesses modernize their operations. We called it Northwest Tech Solutions, and we started it with a handshake agreement and a shared dream of proving that hard work and integrity could build something meaningful. Jake handled the business development and client relationships, while I focused on the technical implementation and problem solving. Our first client was Sarah Chen, who owned a struggling bookstore that was losing customers to online retailers. She had heard about us through Mrs. Rodriguez, who apparently knew every small business owner in the neighborhood. Sarah was skeptical at first, having been burned by previous consultants who had promised the world and delivered nothing. "I don't have money to waste on fancy solutions," Sarah told us during our first meeting in her cluttered back office. "I need something practical that will actually help me compete with the big companies." I spent 3 days studying her business operations, understanding her customer base, and identifying the specific challenges she faced. Then I built her a custom inventory management system that integrated with an e-commerce website, allowing her customers to check book availability online and reserve items for pickup. The system cost her less than what she had been spending on newspaper advertising and immediately increased her sales by 30%. Word spread quickly through the local business community. Sarah became our biggest advocate, recommending us to every business owner she knew. Within 6 months, we had 12 regular clients and a waiting list of potential customers. The work was challenging, but incredibly rewarding. Every day brought new problems to solve, new systems to design, and new relationships to build. I was working 18-hour days, but it felt completely different from the exhausting, soul-crushing labor I had done in my father's construction business. This was creative, meaningful work that made a real difference in people's lives. Jake and I reinvested every penny back into the company, hiring additional programmers and expanding our service offerings. We developed a reputation for honesty, reliability, and innovative solutions that actually worked. Our clients trusted us because we never oversold or made promises we couldn't keep. But success couldn't completely heal the wound my family had left. Late at night when I was alone in my apartment, I would sometimes find myself looking at my phone wondering if anyone back home ever thought about me, if they regretted their choice to cut me off completely. The answer came 18 months later through social media. I had avoided looking up my family online, but curiosity finally got the better of me during a particularly lonely weekend. What I discovered made my blood boil. Danny had been using my supposed abandonment of the family to manipulate people into giving him money. He had created social media posts painting himself as the victim of a cruel, selfish brother who had inherited money and then cut off his entire family. He claimed that my refusal to help had forced my parents into financial hardship and that he was working multiple jobs to support them. The posts were masterfully crafted lies designed to generate sympathy and open wallets. Danny had always been charismatic, and these fabricated stories about family betrayal were getting him exactly the response he wanted. People were sending him money, offering him jobs, and treating him like a tragic hero who had been wronged by his heartless sibling. Reading those posts, I realized that my family hadn't just abandoned me. They had actively participated in rewriting history to make me the villain in their story. While I had been working honestly to build a new life, they had been using my absence to further their own agenda. The discovery filled me with a new kind of determination. If they wanted to make me the successful brother who had abandoned his family, then I would become so successful that their lies would eventually crumble under the weight of the truth. 3 years into building Northwest Tech Solutions, everything changed in a single phone call. I was in our expanded office space in downtown Seattle reviewing code for a new client project when Jake burst through the door with an expression I had never seen before. "Freeman, you need to sit down," he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "What happened? Did we lose a client?" "No." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "We just got a call from Marcus Webb at Coastal Enterprises. They want to buy us." Coastal Enterprises was one of the largest technology companies on the West Coast, known for acquiring innovative smaller firms and integrating them into their massive corporate structure. I had read about their acquisitions in business magazines, but I never imagined we were on their radar. "Buy us, what does that even mean?" Jake pulled out his phone and showed me the notes he had taken during the call. "They've been watching our growth for the past year. Apparently, several of our clients have connections to their network, and word got back to their development team about the solutions we've been creating." The number he showed me made my head spin. $12 million for a complete acquisition of Northwest Tech Solutions, including our client-based proprietary software, and the commitment to keep both Jake and me on as senior consultants for at least 3 years. The meeting with Marcus Webb took place the following week in Coastal's gleaming downtown office building. Marcus was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had built his company through a combination of technical innovation and strategic acquisitions. He treated Jake and me with a level of respect I had never experienced in business before. "Your company has solved problems that we've been struggling with for years," Marcus explained as we reviewed the acquisition terms. "Your approach to small business technology integration is exactly what the market needs, and your reputation for integrity is something we want to be associated with." The due diligence process took 6 weeks, during which Coastal's team examined every aspect of our business operations. They interviewed our clients, reviewed our financial records, and tested our software systems. The fact that everything checked out perfectly was a testament to the honest foundation Jake and I had built our company on. When the final papers were signed, I walked away with $6 million after taxes and fees. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of having, and I had earned every penny through hard work, creativity, and treating people with respect. The first thing I did was buy the yacht. Not because I needed it, but because it represented everything my family had told me I would never achieve. They had painted me as selfish and irresponsible, someone who would waste Grandpa's inheritance and amount to nothing. The 70-foot yacht, Second Chance, was proof that their judgment had been completely wrong. I found the yacht through Captain Rodriguez, a retired naval officer who had started selling luxury boats after leaving the military. He understood immediately why this purchase was important to me, even though I didn't share the full story of my family situation. A young man doesn't buy a boat like this unless he's either celebrating something major or proving something important, Captain Rodriguez observed as we walked through the pristine cabin. Either way, this vessel will serve you well. The yacht was everything I had imagined and more. Fully equipped kitchen, spacious sleeping quarters, state-of-the-art navigation system, and enough space to host small gatherings or simply enjoy solitary time on the water. Standing on the deck during my first solo sailing trip, looking out at the endless Pacific Ocean, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since Grandpa's death. It was during this period of success and self-reflection that I reconnected with my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who had always been the independent thinker in the extended family. Patricia worked as a nurse at a hospital in Portland, about 3 hours south of Seattle. She had reached out through a mutual cousin asking for my contact information because she wanted to apologize for not standing up for me during the family crisis. Our first phone conversation lasted 4 hours. Patricia had remained in contact with my parents throughout the past 3 years, but she had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the narrative they had created about my departure. Freeman, I want you to know that not everyone believes the story they've been telling, Patricia said, her voice filled with regret. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was trying to keep peace in the family. I realize now that my silence was a form of betrayal, too. Patricia filled in the gaps about what had happened after I left. Danny's gambling had not improved despite the family's sacrifice of their relationship with me. In fact, it had gotten worse. He had burned through the money they had managed to scrape together for him and was now borrowing against my parents' house to fund his addiction. Your mother has been working double shifts at the department store, Patricia explained. Your father mortgaged the house twice to cover Danny's debts, and they're barely keeping up with the payments. Meanwhile, Danny tells everyone who will listen that his problems are your fault because you abandoned the family when they needed you most. The news hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything they had done to me, despite their cruel abandonment and character assassination, I still cared about my parents' well-being. They were victims of Danny's manipulation, just as much as I was, even though they had chosen to enable his behavior rather than confront it. Patricia, are they in real danger of losing the house? Yes, she said quietly. I've offered to help, but your mother is too proud to take money from me. She says the family needs to solve its own problems, which apparently means waiting for Danny to magically become responsible or for you to come crawling back with your wallet open. I learned that my parents' health was deteriorating from the stress. My father had developed high blood pressure, and my mother was showing signs of depression. They were aging rapidly under the weight of financial pressure and the emotional toll of covering for Danny's increasingly erratic behavior. But the most disturbing news was yet to come. Patricia had discovered through her connections in the medical community that Danny was now involved with dangerous people. His gambling debts had escalated beyond local bookies and casino credit lines. He owed money to organized crime figures who didn't negotiate payment plans or accept excuses. Freeman, I think your brother might be in real physical danger this time, Patricia said. But he's still manipulating your parents, making them believe that if they can just come up with enough money, everything will be fine. That conversation forced me to confront a painful reality. My success meant nothing if I used it to isolate myself completely from the people I had once loved. Grandpa had left me that inheritance not just to build wealth, but to build character and wisdom. Part of wisdom meant learning when to hold firm to principles and when to extend grace to people who had made terrible mistakes. I wasn't ready to reconcile with my family, but I was ready to learn more about their current situation. Patricia became my liaison, keeping me informed about their struggles while respecting my need for distance and emotional protection. The yacht became my sanctuary during this emotionally complex period. I would spend weekends alone on the water thinking through the impossible situation my family had created. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I now had the means to solve their financial problems easily, but doing so would validate their decision to abandon me and enable Danny's addiction to continue unchecked. The full scope of my family's situation became clear 6 months later when Patricia called me in a panic. She had been visiting my parents and discovered a stack of legal documents that painted a terrifying picture of their financial destruction. "Mike, Freeman, you need to know what's really been happening," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "I found mortgage papers, loan documents, and credit card statements that your parents have been hiding from everyone, including me." She had gone to their house to check on my mother, who had been complaining of severe headaches and fatigue. While Linda napped, Patricia had noticed a pile of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. Concerned about unpaid bills, she had looked through the correspondence and discovered the true extent of the financial devastation. My parents hadn't just borrowed against their house twice. They had refinanced it 3 times, each time pulling out equity to pay Danny's gambling debts. The house that had been paid off when Grandpa died was now mortgaged for more than its current market value. They were underwater on a property that had been in our family for 30 years. The documents show payments to casinos' private lenders and some companies I'd never heard of, Patricia explained. "Your mother has been working double shifts at the department store, and your father has been taking on construction projects even though his back can barely handle the work anymore. But the financial documents were only part of the story." Patricia had also discovered medical bills that revealed the toll this stress was taking on my parents' health. My father was now taking medication for high blood pressure and anxiety. My mother was being treated for severe depression and had been hospitalized twice in the past year for what the doctors called stress-related cardiac episodes. Dr. Martinez, their longtime family physician, had apparently been urging them to seek counseling and consider bankruptcy as a way to escape the cycle of debt. But my parents refused both suggestions, clinging to the hope that Danny would eventually overcome his gambling addiction and that I would eventually forgive the family and return to help solve their problems. The most shocking revelation came when Patricia looked deeper into some of the loan documents. Danny hadn't just been gambling away money my parents gave him. He had been forging documents and potentially using my old identity information to secure additional loans. "Freeman, some of these papers have your name on them," Patricia said, her voice filled with dread. "There are loan applications dated from 2 years ago after you had already moved to Seattle. Someone signed your name on financial documents." The possibility that Danny had committed identity theft added a criminal dimension to the family crisis that changed everything. This was no longer just about enabling a gambling addiction or poor family decisions. This was about federal crimes that could destroy not just Danny, but potentially implicate my parents if they had knowledge of the fraud. I contacted my attorney, David Kim, who specialized in financial crimes and business law. David had helped with the Coastal Enterprises acquisition and had become a trusted advisor for complex legal matters. "Freeman, if your brother has been using your identity to secure loans, we need to document everything and potentially involve federal authorities," David explained. "Identity theft across state lines is a serious federal crime, and the longer it goes unreported, the more complicated the situation becomes." David's investigation revealed that Danny had indeed been committing fraud. Using personal information he had retained from our childhood, including my social security number and previous address history, he had applied for credit cards and personal loans in my name. The total amount was over $80,000 money that had disappeared into casinos and private gambling operations. "And the good news is that you're clearly the victim here," David told me. The bad news is that reporting this will likely result in serious criminal charges against your brother and potentially financial ruin for your parents if they're found to have any knowledge of the fraud. I was faced with an impossible choice. I could report the identity theft and protect myself legally, but doing so would almost certainly send Danny to federal prison and destroy what remained of my parents' financial security. Or I could remain silent and potentially become liable for debts I didn't create while enabling Danny's criminal behavior to continue. The situation became even more complicated when Patricia discovered that Danny was now involved with Tony Castellano, a known organized crime figure who operated illegal gambling operations throughout the Midwest. Danny owed Castellano over $50,000, and the interest was compounding weekly. Freeman, these people don't just take your money when you can't pay, Patricia warned. Your brother is in physical danger, but he's also putting your parents at risk. Castellano's people have been to the house twice, and your father answered the door both times. Mrs. Henderson, the longtime family neighbor, had called Patricia after witnessing the visits from Castellano's associates. She described two large men in expensive suits who spoke quietly with my father on the front porch before leaving in a black sedan. My father had been visibly shaken after both encounters. The criminal element added urgency to an already desperate situation. Even if I was willing to forgive my family and help solve their financial problems, paying money to organized crime figures would likely make the situation worse rather than better. People like Castellano viewed payment as a sign of weakness and an invitation to demand even more money. Bank manager Williams, who had processed my parents' multiple mortgage refinances, had actually tried to warn them about the pattern of debt they were creating. But my parents had been so focused on the immediate crisis of Danny's threats and demands that they couldn't see the long-term destruction they were enabling. Your parents are good people who got trapped in an impossible situation, Williams explained to Patricia. They love their son, but they don't understand that they're destroying themselves without actually helping him overcome his addiction. Dr. Martinez had reached the same conclusion from a medical perspective. He had been treating stress-related symptoms in both my parents for over 2 years, and he could see that their health was deteriorating rapidly under the emotional and financial pressure. Mr. Freeman. Dr. Martinez told Patricia during my mother's last appointment, "Your sister and brother-in-law need professional help to break the cycle they're caught in. This level of chronic stress is going to kill them if it continues much longer." The revelation phase of this crisis forced me to confront the complexity of family love and responsibility. My parents had made terrible decisions chosen to enable Danny's addiction and treated me cruelly when I refused to participate in that enabling. But they were also victims of manipulation and threats that had spiraled far beyond anything they could have anticipated. Danny had evolved from a gambling addict into a criminal who was destroying everyone around him while playing the victim and blaming me for the family's problems. The social media posts that had initially angered me now seemed almost quaint compared to the identity theft and organized crime connections that had developed. As I processed all this information from the deck of my yacht watching the Seattle skyline glow in the sunset, I realized that my success and independence had given me something my parents didn't have the freedom to make choices based on principles rather than fear. I could afford to stand up to people like Castellano in ways my parents never could. The question was whether I was willing to use that freedom to save people who had abandoned me, and whether doing so would make me an enabler just like they had become. The trap was set in motion by a single photograph. Patricia had been visiting me in Seattle for a long weekend, and I had taken her sailing on the yacht as a way to show her that I had built a good life despite the family's rejection. She was proud of what I had accomplished and wanted to share that pride with her social media friends. "Okay, Freeman, would you mind if I posted a photo of us on the boat?" she asked, as we anchored near a small island for lunch. I'm just so proud of how well you've done, and I want people to see that you're thriving." I agreed, thinking it was a harmless way for Patricia to celebrate our renewed relationship. The photo she took was beautiful, the two of us smiling on the deck of Second Chance, with the Seattle skyline in the background. She posted it on Facebook with a caption about family resilience and being proud of loved ones who overcome adversity. What neither of us anticipated was how quickly that photo would travel through our extended family network and eventually reach my parents and Danny. The text message from my father arrived less than 3 hours after Patricia posted the photo. My phone buzzed while I was cleaning up the yacht's galley, and I assumed it was a work-related message. When I saw my father's name on the screen, my hands started shaking. After 5 years of complete silence, seeing his contact information felt like encountering a ghost. "You could sell it to help your brother." Those 7 words contained everything I needed to know about my family's priorities. Not, "We miss you," or "We're sorry for how we treated you," or "We'd like to talk and work things out." Just a demand for money disguised as a suggestion, the same pattern that had destroyed our relationship 5 years earlier. I stared at the message for 20 minutes, feeling a mixture of rage, sadness, and bitter vindication. My success had proven that Grandpa's faith in me was justified, that I could build something meaningful with the inheritance he had left me. But my family's response to that success was exactly what I should have expected. They saw it as an opportunity to exploit, rather than a reason to feel proud. Patricia noticed my expression when she came back from photographing the island scenery. "Freeman, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed her the text message. She read it twice, her face cycling through shock, anger, and then a deep sadness that mirrored my own feelings. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I had no idea posting that photo would trigger this kind of response. I was just trying to celebrate your success." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "If anything, this proves that we were right to be cautious about reconnecting with them." Their first response to seeing my success isn't happiness for me or regret about their treatment. It's greed. But as the initial anger faded, I found myself thinking about the larger situation Patricia had described. My parents' health problems, the mortgage crisis, Danny's involvement with dangerous criminals. The text message wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation. That night back at my Seattle apartment, I made a decision that would have shocked the 27-year-old version of myself who had walked out of that family dinner 5 years earlier. I was going to go home and confront this situation directly. Patricia tried to talk me out of it. "Freeman, you don't owe them anything after how they treated you. You've built a good life here, and getting involved with their problems will just drag you back into the same toxic patterns." But I had advantages now that I hadn't possessed 5 years ago. Financial security, legal representation, emotional distance, and most importantly, a clear understanding of the situation I was walking into. I wasn't going home as the desperate young man seeking family approval. I was going as a successful adult who had the resources to potentially solve problems while protecting myself from further manipulation. David Kim strongly advised against making contact with my family without legal protection. "Freeman, if your brother has been committing identity theft and is involved with organized crime, confronting them directly could put you in physical danger. Let's handle this through official channels instead." But I had learned something about myself during those years of building Northwest Tech Solutions. I was at my best when I faced problems directly rather than hiding behind intermediaries or avoiding difficult conversations. The business success had come from being willing to walk into challenging situations and find creative solutions that other people missed. I called Patricia and asked her to set up a meeting with my parents. Not Danny, just Robert and Linda, so we could have an honest conversation about the family's situation without his manipulation and lies complicating everything. "Tell them I'm willing to discuss helping with their financial problems," I instructed Patricia, "but make it clear that any conversation depends on complete honesty about Danny's situation and their willingness to consider real solutions rather than just temporary fixes." Patricia made the call and reported back that my parents were eager to meet. Too eager, in fact. Linda had started crying on the phone, saying she had prayed every day for 5 years that I would come home and help save the family. "Freeman, I'm worried they're setting expectations that you're not prepared to meet," Patricia warned. "They sounded like they think you're coming home to solve all their problems with no conditions or consequences for Danny." That concern proved to be well-founded when I arrived at my parents' house the following Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as I remembered, but my childhood home showed obvious signs of financial stress. The paint was peeling, the lawn was overgrown, and there were multiple cars parked in the driveway that I didn't recognize. I knocked on the front door instead of walking in a symbolic gesture that acknowledged I was no longer a family member who belonged there automatically. My mother answered the door, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Linda looked older than her years, with gray hair that had been poorly dyed brown and lines around her eyes that spoke of chronic worry and sleepless nights. But when she saw me, her face lit up with a relief and joy that reminded me of the mother I had loved as a child. "Freeman," she said, tears already starting, "thank God you're here. We've needed you so much." My father appeared behind her, looking equally aged but more guarded. Robert had always been harder to read emotionally, but I could see the stress in his posture and the way his hands trembled slightly when he extended one for a handshake. "Son," he said, the word carrying weight that hadn't been there 5 years earlier, "we have a lot to talk about." They led me into the living room, where I immediately noticed that Grandpa's chair was gone. In its place sat Danny, wearing an expensive suit that he clearly couldn't afford, and flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, but who radiated the kind of quiet menace that suggested they weren't family friends. Surprise, Freeman," Danny said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought it was time we all had a family reunion." The setup became clear immediately. This wasn't going to be an honest conversation about family reconciliation and problem solving. This was an ambush designed to pressure me into handing over money with witnesses present to ensure I couldn't leave without paying. Vincent and Bruno, the 2 men with Danny, introduced themselves politely, but positioned themselves between me and the front door. Their body language was casual but clearly threatening, and I realized that my decision to confront the family situation directly had walked me into a trap that could have serious consequences. My father's eyes held an apology mixed with fear. My mother looked confused and frightened, as if she hadn't understood what Danny was planning when he arranged this confrontation. "Danny, what's going on here?" Linda asked, her voice shaking. "Freeman came home to help us work things out as a family." "That's exactly what we're doing, Mom," Danny replied, his tone taking on the manipulative sweetness I remembered from childhood. "Freeman has money, we have problems, and these gentlemen are here to help us reach a fair agreement that benefits everyone." Officer Janet Pierce's arrival 20 minutes later probably saved my life, though at the time I didn't realize how dangerous the situation had become. Tom, the neighbor across the street, had noticed the unfamiliar cars and the tense atmosphere around the house, and decided to call for a wellness check. When Officer Pierce knocked on the door, Vincent and Bruno immediately shifted into a different mode, becoming polite citizens who were just visiting friends. But Pierce was experienced enough to recognize the signs of a dangerous situation, and she asked to speak with each person in the house individually. That's when the full scope of Danny's plan became clear. He had been orchestrating this confrontation for months, ever since Patricia first mentioned that she had been in contact with me. The expensive suit, the criminal associates, the timing of the photo, and the text message. Everything had been calculated to create a situation where I would feel pressured to solve the family's problems immediately, rather than thinking through the consequences. What Danny didn't know was that I had been planning for this confrontation just as carefully as he had. The difference was that my planning was designed to protect everyone in the family, including him, while his planning was designed to exploit and threaten. When Officer Pierce asked to speak with me privately, I pulled out my phone and showed her something that made her eyes widen with surprise. I had been recording the entire conversation from the moment I walked into the house using an app that automatically uploaded audio to a secure cloud server. Officer Pierce, I need you to know that I came here voluntarily to try to help my family, but I've walked into what appears to be an extortion situation, I explained quietly. The two men with my brother are here to pressure me into giving them money, and I have reason to believe my brother has been committing federal crimes. I also showed her the legal documents that David Kim had prepared before I made this trip, restraining orders against Danny financial crime reports ready to be filed with federal authorities, and a comprehensive legal strategy for protecting my parents, while ensuring that Danny faced appropriate consequences for his actions. Mr. Freeman, it sounds like you've been preparing for this situation, Officer Pierce observed. For 5 years, I confirmed. I knew this day would come eventually, and I wanted to be ready to protect my family when it did. The real surprise came when Agent Sarah Walsh from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division arrived 30 minutes later. I had contacted the federal authorities weeks earlier after David Kim's investigation had uncovered the full scope of Danny's identity theft and fraud. The FBI had been building a case against Danny and his criminal associates, and my willingness to cooperate as a victim had given them the evidence they needed. Mr. Daniel Freeman, Agent Walsh announced as she entered the living room with her credentials displayed, you're under arrest for identity theft wire fraud and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Danny's mask of control disappeared instantly. The charming manipulator who had orchestrated this elaborate trap suddenly became a scared, desperate man who realized that his schemes had finally caught up with him. Freeman, you can't do this, Danny pleaded as Agent Walsh read him his rights. I'm your brother. Family doesn't turn family over to the police. Family also doesn't commit identity theft and threaten each other with criminals, I replied calmly. You made your choices, Danny. Now you get to face the consequences. Vincent and Bruno were also arrested as they had outstanding warrants for their involvement in organized crime activities. The FBI had been tracking their association with Tony Castellano for months, and Danny's cooperation with them had provided additional evidence for the federal case. My parents watched in shock as their golden child was handcuffed and led away. Linda sobbed quietly, while Robert stood with his shoulders slumped in defeat. For the first time in years, they were forced to confront the reality of what Danny had become and what their enabling had helped create. But the legal consequences were only part of the solution I had prepared. After the arrests, I sat down with my parents at their kitchen table and presented them with documents that David Kim had spent weeks preparing. Robert and Linda. I began using their names instead of Mom and Dad to emphasize the formal nature of this discussion. I'm prepared to help you save your house and rebuild your financial security. But that help comes with conditions that are non-negotiable. The legal documents outlined a comprehensive plan for resolving their financial crisis while preventing future manipulation. I would pay off the mortgage and provide them with enough money to cover Danny's legitimate debts to regular creditors. In exchange, they would enter mandatory counseling for codependency and financial management, agree to a 5-year restraining order against Danny, and participate in a family therapy program designed to rebuild healthy relationships. Freeman, Linda said through her tears, we don't deserve your help after how we treated you. You're right, I agreed. You don't deserve it, but Grandpa would have wanted me to protect you even from yourselves. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what's right. Robert read through the documents carefully, his construction worker's hands shaking as he processed the legal language. Son, this is very generous, but it's also very controlling. You're essentially putting us in financial guardianship. I'm putting you in a position where you can't be manipulated again, or, I corrected. Danny will be in federal prison for at least 5 years. When he gets out, he's going to try the same manipulation tactics that worked before. This legal framework ensures that you'll have the support and protection you need to say no. The therapy requirement was the most important part of the plan. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a family therapist who specialized in addiction-related family dynamics, would work with my parents to help them understand how their enabling behavior had contributed to both Danny's destruction and the family's crisis. Mr. and Mrs. Freeman, Dr. Walsh explained during their first session, loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face those consequences so they can learn and grow. The financial arrangements were structured to ensure that my parents could live comfortably while preventing them from accessing large amounts of money that could be used to enable Danny's future demands. They would receive a monthly allowance sufficient for their needs plus access to emergency funds for legitimate medical or household expenses. Judge Thompson, who issued the restraining orders against Danny, made it clear that any attempt to contact or manipulate the family would result in additional criminal charges. Mr. Freeman, your family has given you multiple opportunities to address your addictive and criminal behavior through voluntary treatment. You chose instead to escalate your crimes and endanger your family. The court will not tolerate any further attempts at manipulation or intimidation. Detective Morris, who had been working with the FBI on the organized crime aspects of the case, explained that Danny's cooperation with Castellano's operation had actually put the entire family in danger. Your brother wasn't just borrowing money from these people, he told my parents. He was providing them with information about your financial situation and assets. They saw your house as collateral for his debts. The revelation that Danny had been willing to risk his parents' physical safety for his gambling addiction was the final piece of evidence my parents needed to understand that they had been protecting someone who didn't deserve their loyalty. 6 weeks after the arrests, I received a handwritten letter from Danny in federal detention. It was a masterpiece of manipulation filled with apologies, promises to change, and subtle attempts to make me feel guilty for destroying the family by cooperating with law enforcement. I read the letter once and then shredded it. The person who had written it wasn't my brother anymore. That person had been consumed years ago by addiction and selfishness, leaving behind only a criminal who used family connections to avoid consequences for his actions. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of Second Chance, watching my parents carefully navigate their first sailing lesson with Captain Rodriguez. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. The stress lines around my mother's eyes had softened, and she actually smiled when she successfully adjusted the jib sail. My father, who had been stooped with worry and poor health, stood straighter and moved with more confidence than I had seen in years. And a Freeman? I never thought I'd enjoy being on the water, Linda called out as she practiced tying nautical knots. Your grandfather always said sailing taught patience and respect for forces beyond your control. I'm finally beginning to understand what he meant. The therapy sessions with Dr. Walsh had been transformative for all three of us. My parents had learned to recognize the difference between love and enabling, while I had learned to separate my justified anger about their past choices from my genuine care for their well-being. The process hadn't been easy, and there had been several sessions where old grievances and hurt feelings had erupted into painful confrontations. Mr. Freeman, Dr. Walsh had said during one particularly difficult session, your parents made terrible decisions that hurt you deeply, but they made those decisions from a place of fear and manipulation, not malice. Can you find a way to forgive them without forgetting the lessons you learned from their mistakes? The answer had taken months to develop. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened, or that their choices hadn't caused real damage. It meant accepting that people can change when they're given the right support and incentives, and that family relationships can be rebuilt on healthier foundations. My father approached me as I watched the Seattle skyline from the yacht's stern. Freeman, I owe you an apology that's 5 years overdue, he said, his voice carrying a humility I had never heard from him before. "You've already apologized, Dad, multiple times. Not for the right things, Robert continued. "I apologize for choosing Danny over you, for cutting you off for the financial decisions we made. But I never apologized for the most important thing I failed to recognize, the man you were becoming, and the character your grandfather had seen in you from the beginning." He paused, looking out at the water before continuing. "When you walked away from that family dinner 5 years ago, you were showing more wisdom and integrity than I had shown in months of bad decisions. I was too proud and too scared to admit that my 27-year-old son understood something about family and responsibility that I had forgotten." The conversation was interrupted by a call from the Freeman Family Foundation, the organization I had established to help other families dealing with addiction-related financial and emotional crises. Maria Santos, the foundation's director, was calling to update me on our latest success story. "Freeman, you're going to love this," Maria said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The Johnson family just called to say that their son has been clean for 6 months and has started paying back the money he borrowed from them. They credit the family therapy program we funded with saving their relationships. The foundation had become my way of turning the painful lessons from my family's crisis into something that could help other people avoid similar destruction. We provided funding for family therapy, financial counseling, and legal assistance for families being manipulated by addicted relatives. More importantly, we helped families learn the difference between supporting someone's recovery and enabling their addiction." "How many families have we helped this year?" I asked. 47 complete cases, with another 23 in various stages of the program," Maria reported. "The success rate is over 70%, which is significantly higher than the national average for addiction recovery programs." The foundation's success came from addressing the entire family system, rather than just focusing on the addicted individual. We had learned that addiction creates victims throughout the family structure, and recovery requires healing all those relationships, not just treating the primary addiction. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had become a consultant for the foundation, often spoke at our fundraising events about the importance of what she called loving boundaries. When we truly love someone, she would tell audiences of families struggling with addiction, we don't protect them from the natural consequences of their actions. We provide support for their recovery while maintaining boundaries that protect ourselves and other family members from manipulation and abuse. Captain Rodriguez had become an unexpected part of our family healing process. Teaching my father to sail had given them both a way to connect through shared learning rather than revisiting past conflicts. "Your father has good instincts for reading the wind," Captain Rodriguez told me privately. "He just needed someone to teach him how to trust those instincts instead of forcing situations that can't be controlled." The sailing lessons had become a metaphor for our family's healing process. Learning to work with natural forces rather than fighting them, understanding when to adjust course, and when to stay committed to a destination, recognizing that different weather conditions required different approaches to the same goals. Linda had surprised everyone by taking to sailing more naturally than either my father or me. She had an intuitive understanding of how to position the boat to catch favorable winds, and she enjoyed the meditative aspects of long periods on the water. "Freeman, there's something peaceful about being out here that I never experienced during all those years of worrying about Danny," she told me during one of our weekend trips. "It's like the water washes away all the guilt and fear I was carrying around." The legal resolution of Danny's case had provided closure for the criminal aspects of our family crisis. He had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The sentence included mandatory addiction treatment and financial counseling, giving him the opportunity to address his underlying problems in a controlled environment. More importantly, the restraining orders and legal framework David Kim had created meant that Danny couldn't manipulate my parents even after his release. Any contact would have to be supervised and approved by the court, preventing him from falling back into old patterns of exploitation. Tony Castellano and his associates had received much longer sentences for their organized crime activities, effectively eliminating the criminal threat that had been hanging over my family for years. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had potentially saved my life by calling for the wellness check, had become an unofficial family friend. She often joined us for holiday dinners and had become Linda's sailing companion when I wasn't available to take my parents out on the water. Freeman, your family has been through something terrible, but you've turned it into something beautiful, Mrs. Henderson observed during one of our Thanksgiving celebrations. Not many people would have had the wisdom to save their parents while protecting themselves from further harm. The financial aspects of the family's recovery had stabilized completely. My parents' house was paid off, their medical bills were covered, and they had enough monthly income to live comfortably without financial stress. More importantly, they had learned to manage money responsibly and to recognize warning signs of financial manipulation. Patricia had joined the Foundation's board of directors, using her nursing background to help us understand the health impacts of addiction-related family stress. Freeman, what you've built here goes way beyond helping your own family, she told me during one of our board meetings. You're preventing other families from going through years of the kind of suffering we experienced. The yacht had become a symbol of much more than financial success. It represented the possibility of rebuilding relationships on healthier foundations, the importance of setting boundaries while maintaining love, and the value of turning painful experiences into opportunities to help other people. As the sun set over Elliott Bay during our latest family sailing trip, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. 5 years earlier, I had been a young man who thought family loyalty meant accepting manipulation and abuse. Now I understood that real family love sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. Grandpa's inheritance had given me the financial means to solve my family's crisis, but more importantly, his example had given me the character to solve it in a way that promoted healing, rather than just enabling continued dysfunction. The money had been important, but the wisdom to use it correctly had been the real inheritance. My parents had learned that protecting someone from consequences isn't the same as loving them, and that real support means helping people become stronger rather than making their problems disappear temporarily. They had also learned that admitting mistakes doesn't diminish parental authority. It demonstrates the kind of growth and humility that children can respect and emulate. The Foundation's work continued to expand, reaching families across the country who were trapped in similar cycles of addiction-related manipulation and financial destruction. Each success story validated the lesson that had emerged from our family's crisis. Love without boundaries isn't really love, and sometimes the most caring thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction. As we sailed back to the marina that evening, my mother asked me a question that had been on her mind for months. Freeman, do you ever regret not giving Danny the money when he first asked for it 5 years ago? Do you think things might have been different if we had handled it differently? I considered the question carefully before answering. Mom giving Danny that money would have delayed the crisis, not prevented it. His gambling addiction was going to escalate regardless, and enabling it would have just made the eventual consequences worse. The only difference would have been that we all would have been broke and traumatized when the truth finally came out. But we lost 5 years with you, she replied, tears beginning to form. 5 years when we could have been proud of what you were building instead of worrying about what Danny was destroying. Those 5 years weren't wasted, I assured her. I needed that time to become strong enough to help all of us heal properly. If we had tried to fix things earlier, I wouldn't have had the resources or wisdom to create a real solution. Sometimes separation is necessary before reconciliation becomes possible. The evening ended with a tradition we had developed over the past 6 months. We stood together on the deck and shared one thing we were grateful for and one thing we had learned since our last sailing trip. It was Dr. Walsh's idea a way of acknowledging growth and maintaining perspective on how far we had come. I'm grateful for second chances, Linda said. And I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean saying yes to everything they ask for. I'm grateful for a son who was strong enough to save us from ourselves, Robert added. And I've learned that real strength sometimes looks like stubbornness to people who don't understand the full situation. I'm grateful for a family that was willing to do the hard work of healing, I concluded. And I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the lessons that came from being hurt. As we prepared to dock the yacht, I thought about the message I wanted to leave with anyone who might hear this story. Family relationships are some of the most complex and challenging aspects of human experience. But they're also opportunities to demonstrate the kind of love that promotes growth rather than dependence. The greatest gift we can give someone we love isn't protection from consequences or financial bailouts when they make poor choices. The greatest gift is the kind of consistent boundaried support that helps them become the best version of themselves, even when that process is difficult and painful. True family isn't about blood relations or unconditional acceptance of destructive behavior. True family is about choosing to support each other's growth, maintaining respect, even during conflict, and being willing to make hard decisions that serve everyone's long-term well-being, rather than just providing short-term comfort. The Yacht second chance had earned its name. We had all been given the opportunity to rebuild our relationships on healthier foundations, to learn from our mistakes without being defined by them, and to turn our painful experiences into wisdom that could help other people facing similar challenges. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between helping someone you love and protecting yourself from their destructive behavior? How do you think families can show love while maintaining healthy boundaries? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who might benefit from learning about the difference between enabling and empowering the people we care about. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope it helps you navigate your own family relationships with wisdom, compassion, and strength.